America gave us loud muscle cars. Japan led the way with reliable yet tunable machines. And all over Europe, the bar was set for precise engineering. But here in Australia, we somehow combined all of it into one car that you've probably never heard of. This is the AU Falcon. This is Ford Australia's legendary machine that may just be the greatest budget sports car that the rest of the world never got. Today, I'm going to be breaking down everything you need to know about these ugly looking cars and why they genuinely might be one of the most underrated performance platforms in the world. As a wise man once said, you can't spell Australia without AU. But before these machines were classed as a legendary Aussie vehicle, it had to go through some rough early days. So get comfy and let me take you all the way back to 1998 where it all began. Picture this, Ford just announced the release of their new AU Falcon, a rear-wheel drive car designed and engineered right here in Australia. You walk into your nearest Ford dealership and you're presented with many options to suit your lifestyle. They had everything covered from taxi spec sedans, work-ready utes, family-orientated station wagons, hotted-up performance options, and even luxury models to compete with the European cars of the time. There was something for everyone, and not to mention, you had the choice between an American-designed 5-litre V8 or Ford Australia's own engineered 4-litre inline-6. More on that later. Overwhelmed by choice, you look around and there was a red carpet leading to closed doors. You ask the salesman, hey, what have you got hiding out the back there? And he sneakily looks around the showroom and tells you to follow him. He walks you along the red carpet and through those closed doors, where he presents to you one of 3 rare AU models. The sporty TE50, the luxurious TL50, and the king of all AU Falcons, the TS50. Now, all of this sounds great, but how could this all go so wrong and lead to sales so poor that it put Ford Australia at a loss of millions of dollars? Well, the entry-level models range from about 30 to 55,000 Australian dollars, which in today's money is about $59,000 to $108,000. And then those special TS50 models were priced from about 60 to 85,000 new, or roughly between 117 and 165K in today's money. It baffles me to think that in today's money, you could buy something like this for something back then. But it was older car, anyway, moving on. It was okay value at the time, but the issue was its Aussie competitor, the VT Commodore. This thing gave Australia its first taste of what is arguably the most famous V8 to ever exist, the 5.7-litre LS1, straight out of an American C5 Corvette. That's right, they were putting these high-performance V8s in family sedans and work utes. Now, Ford Australia was doing that as well with the Falcons, but their V8 wasn't quite as great. This, along with Holden's approach to target the family market rather than the commercial market, led to them dominating private sales, leaving the AU Falcons to become Australia's fleet and government cars at the time, meaning they were used by companies, taxis, the police, everyone. It wasn't a great look for these cars being the Australian version of a Camry, despite it having much more power and rear-wheel drive. But all this and the fact that the AU presents like a cockroach meant that they'd sold under 300,000 units. The sales of the AU Falcon just couldn't keep up with the VT Commodore and was considered a huge loss for Ford Australia, especially after they spent $700 million to create a car that buyers at the time described as, quote, looking like a fish or a melted bar of soap. But nonetheless, some Aussies still saw this ugly duckling for what it was, and they still went on to serve Australians in many ways, from unkillable taxis to actual V8 supercars. There wasn't much that the AU Falcon couldn't do other than, you know, look good. Now, speaking of V8 supercars, Ford was not only losing on the showroom floor, but also out on the track. It took their marketing team just a little bit too long to realize that this is where the money was made and where the brand loyalty was built. But eventually, Ford did pull their millions of sponsorship dollars out of the Australian Open tennis and put it into actual motorsport. And what they did with it was a little bit cheeky.
They'd poached champion driver Craig Lowndes from arch rivals Holden. Ford is gambling on Craig becoming its #1 salesman. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday.
They went and poached one of Holden's best drivers at the time, but even with Craig behind the wheel, Ford only managed to win 8 out of 52 V8 supercar races. And the best part is Craig ended up going back to Holden a couple years later anyway. The whole thing really didn't fix their problems, but it definitely managed to piss off a lot of Holden fans at the time.
Fans so dedicated, they even have their Holden allegiance tattooed on their back.
What do you think when Craig made the switch from Holden to Ford?
Shocking. Terrible. Real traitor.
Holden set him up, he should have stuck with Holden.
Those guys that were putting the Holden posters up there or tattoos on their back, we'll hopefully soon replacing them with Ford ones.
Jumping forward to today, there's estimated to be less than 50,000 of these left on Aussie roads. But what a family of four would have bought back then for about 60 grand today, you can now pick up for a couple $1,000s. And if you're lucky like my mate Yorak, you can find them even cheaper. He recently picked up this AU wagon, still running and in an immaculate rust-free condition for just 500 bucks. But if you're a baller like myself, you can spend about 4 to 6 grand today and get yourself a really solid and well-specced one. At the start of the year, I actually bought drift bin here off my mate Peter for his asking price of 6 grand. Now this is definitely on the higher end of pricing for an AU Falcon and may sound like a lot for an unregistered 25-year-old car, but when I first picked this up, it already came drift car ready with mods like a manual swap, roll cage, angle kit, hydro brake, coilovers, worked motor, and some other bits and pieces. But since then, I've whacked on this S15 front bar, wrapped the whole thing bright green, and chucked on these aftermarket wheels to get it looking pretty. Anyway, now that we're done with a little history lesson, let's move on to the performance side of things. But before we jump into the little details, let me actually take you out on track and show you what these things can do.
What happened, Mr. Drifter?
Fucking lost it.
Oh, mate. Barely a scratch.
Hey, that's a water.
Man, you could have done more. That's not enough. Mate, that's simply a flesh wound. But it was fucking... Ladies and gentlemen, the AU Falcon. Alongside the new custom panel work, this thing got absolutely filthy on the track. Now, thankfully, Giraffe Tools have sent us out one of their wall-mounted pressure washers. These things are great. Once they're set up, you just reel them off the wall, which means we have that quick and easy car wash experience, but without having to race against a timer or even leave the workshop. No messy cables, no tangled hoses, and no big unit to lug around. It's just this. They come with heaps of different attachments, come out to about 30 meters long, and still push out a ton of pressure, giving us no dramas getting dirt off. Now, obviously, I can't really do much about the tire slap because it looks like it's actually stained the vinyl, but we've got no dramas getting dirt off. It also came with this foam cannon, which actually surprised me because even though we use normal heavy-duty truck wash, it still somehow gave us a nice thick foam wash. And then rinsing off's obviously simple. You just swap back over to your other nozzles and rinse. These things are tracked up to about 30 meters, so you can actually use them as a normal pressure washer for the workshop. Yeah, this is all washed and looking sparkly green again. This is normally the part where I got to spend the next 20-30 minutes winding up all the cables and hoses and cleaning up all my mess. But pack up is easy. You just wind it back into its home, put the gun down, and she's all done. If you're looking to save yourself some headaches while trying to wash your car in the garage or workshop, go check out Giraffe Tools and punch in code Spotto at checkout to save yourself a little bit of extra cash. I genuinely cannot recommend these things enough. I personally use them on all of my cars and even for washing the floors. I'm so thankful that Giraffe Tools has made today's video possible. Do yourself a favor and go check them out. The link is in the description. Now, moving on to the performance of these cars, as I mentioned, AUs came with 2 main engines depending on what model and trim you got. Now, there were a couple of different tuned up engine variations, but the main 2 available were the Windsor 5-litre V8 and the Intech, Ford Australia's unholy 4-litre inline 6. Now, you'd think the 5-litre V8 would be the preferred option here, but funnily enough, the Intech is the more sought-after engine. Sure, they don't really sound as good as a V8, but they drink less fuel, still have tons of torque, and have an incredibly simple and bulletproof design. In fact, the red top VCT versions of the Intech, which came in the late model XR6s, only had 13 kilowatts less than the V8s, which had 2 more cylinders and a whole nother litre of displacement. Now, the Intechs were capable of powering Australian taxis for years through the harshest conditions, with many of them seeing well over 1 million kilometers, only then to retire as an industrial skid machine. I should also mention that in today's day, you can find these things here in Australia for less than a carton of piss. So due to their low cost, simplicity, bulletproof design, all while still pushing out really impressive torque numbers, the straight 6 Intechs are the preferred option for most, especially in the tuning scene where Aussies quickly found out they love boost. It's not uncommon to see these engines make anywhere between 400 and 500 horsepower with a cheap turbo setup with very minimal internal work. You could almost think of the Intech as kind of being like a bigger Aussie Aussie JZ engine, but instead of being designed by the greatest Japanese engineers, they were Australian and about 12 beers deep while designing it. The intakes were also essentially the forefather of Ford Australia's Turbo Barra, their other newer version of the inline six. But even with these new and improved engines existing, a lot of Aussie tuners still prefer the Intech over the Barra because of their insane reliability, simple setup, and very, very low cost. And yes, before you lot jump in the comments, we are currently getting Drift Bin ready for boost. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. It doesn't cost you anything. Now, before we move on, I wanted to address something. I keep getting comments from you lot asking where I got my sunnies from. You lot should know this by now, but these are the two Savage Icon safeties in the fire colorway. But if you don't like the red, they've got tons of other colors and styles with something to suit everyone. Using code Spotto will save you some extra cash at checkout along with their free shipping. Also, I'm probably gonna get my ass kicked if I show you this, but if you know, you know. A massive thank you to Two Savage as always for keeping my eyes protected and my family left unharmed. Link is in the description. Now, I wanted to talk a bit more about the AU's reliability. There's not really much known to go wrong with these cars other than maybe the rust and the sagging roof liners. But to give you an idea, this is another one of Yorak's many AU Falcons. He hasn't serviced this thing in nearly 2 years and has driven this thing to Tittybong and back with just enough oil to stop it from ticking. This thing has lived most of its life on limiter and still hasn't skipped a beat. And with only 300,000 kilometers on the clock, this thing will still live on to do another 100,000 kilometers at least before it needs its next oil change. Now, in terms of the handling of these cars, a majority of the models came out with double wishbone suspension, something that was actually way ahead of its time. This gave the AUs better handling, better contact with the road, and better towing capability. The best part about this is that it did not take Aussies long to figure out that when you paired this up with the incredibly torquey Intech, you basically had unlimited towing capacity, all while still being perfect for doing burnouts. Now, in terms of all the factory accessories, I could go on for hours telling you about all the options, but there was one option that was so undesirable that today it is now considered one of the rarest Ford parts to ever exist. So rare that you can't find it in any Ford dealership's part systems. Ford Australia offered a genuine OEM laptop holder. Yes, a laptop holder from the factory for the AU Falcon, which was only offered with the 2 base models. It was a standing table that clipped into the cup holders and rested on the shift knob. Now, there's very, very little information about these things online, but it's estimated that they were between about 150, maybe 200 bucks new. But today, I've only ever seen one come up for resale on eBay for about $2,000 for a table. Now, you can buy an AU Falcon for $2,000. No, you can buy 4 AU Falcons for $2,000. Now, this is definitely a true collectible for any AU Falcon enthusiast, and I'm sure after making this video, the prices are gonna further skyrocket, pushing me further and further away from my dream of one day owning one. If any of you out there have one and want to get rid of it, I'd be more than happy to take it off your hands, but I refuse to pay any more than 100 bucks for it. Now, not many people know this, but there were actually some concept designs that came from the AU Falcons. There were a handful of third-party designers and engineers that were convinced the AU hadn't reached its full potential. So a handful of rare and very limited concept models were created. Now, the first one I'll show you is the R5. Now, on paper, this thing sounds great. A 5-seater V8 manual off-road ute equipped with things like an electric winch, 240-volt power socket, 50-litre water tank, and even a side exit race exhaust. This thing sounds like a beast, right? But, in execution, they took an XR8 sedan, $250,000, and then made this. I mean, look, this thing is probably an off-road weapon and may look cool to some of you, but aesthetically for myself, I don't think this has aged well. Now, considering Holden tried a very similar design with the Cross 8 and didn't make many sales, I reckon Ford probably dodged another financial bullet. Next up, we have the Falcon 300 Plus. If you thought mangling a sedan into something that it's not was a terrible idea, well, they actually kind of cooked on this one. This is the AU Falcon 300 Plus, what could have been Australia's very own Mustang competitor. This is something that I actually wish we had gotten. This concept 2-door coupe came with a 4.6-litre supercharged V8 from a Mustang, making about 350 kilowatts and could do 0 to 100 in 4.6 seconds, which 25 years ago for a rear-wheel drive V8 was pretty impressive. In 2001, this thing cost about $1 million to develop, and it was actually going to hit production. But with the plan of 100 limited units, they only got 15 orders and it never came to production. We missed out on what could have been Australia's very own supercar. A 2-door supercharged V8, aerodynamic, Yeah, you know what I mean. Now, the next year in 2002, another group of engineers thought that they'd have a crack at trying to get the AU into the coupe market. But this time, they based the design off what had to have been a 10-year-old's crayon drawing. Now, I don't know about you lot, but I already dislike the spider eye look of the XR6 and XR8 headlights. But this thing just takes it a step forward and makes me want to headbutt an ice pick. Now, it is very sex spec, and I can appreciate it for what it is, but this, no. This is disgusting. So, once upon a time, the AU Falcon was a failure. A project that cost Ford Australia millions of dollars in losses, but led to the development of the gorgeous B-Series Falcon, which blessed us with the Turbo Barra. In present day, we're now left with a handful of humble family cars that are itching to shred tires, go sideways, and will continue to push on and outlast every other car on the road today, especially those big ugly microwaves. Oh yeah, one more really important thing before I go.